Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Hello, Andre. Hello, my morning stars. Please come on in. Come on in. We had some technical issues this morning, but we're in the mix. Hey, Jewel, how you doing? Come on in. Come on in. Come on in. And I want you to give us a thumbs up, like us, and share the show. And let's work on these algorithms. You know, we were up to 3 million streams a week. And then suddenly everything changed. So I need you to help us out. We can work this out, everybody. So please reach out to me on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Please get on over there. Andre's already there. And like the show, Andre. Everybody like the show. Thumbs up, thumbs up. Like and subscribe over there. And then go to the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. That's the only Facebook page that I have where I can accept friends. Hey, Kenneth, how you doing? Grand rising to you, my sweet. Sending you so much love. And I'm on X at Santita J and at Santita J Show. So what are we talking about today? It's the election. Are you registered to vote? Have you been purged from the rolls? If you are in a state where you have same day on-site registration, you have been blessed. But even if you've been purged, you still have some remedies. I want you to call 1-866-OUR-VOTE, 1-866-OUR-VOTE. Go to vote.org and find out what your status is. Find out where you're voting. Find out when the polls open, where they are. Vote.org will help you to do that. So let's get right to it. One of the things that's really fascinating is that there's a Gallup poll that came out that showed that Americans just do not trust corporate media. They don't. They don't. Why are you Chip Gibbons from Defending Rights and Dissent? Why are you laughing?
Because I can imagine not trusting corporate media. It's so. No, I'm joking. Obviously, yes.
Sure.
I'm shocked. I mean, between the weapons of mass destruction and the hospitals in Gaza that bomb themselves, who cannot trust corporate media?
Well, I'm telling you, I'm looking at Bill Adair from the founder of PolitiFact, and I enjoyed them. And it's always good to see what they're talking about. And he has a book entitled, as I just said, The Big Lie, and they referenced an interview that he had on C-SPAN on Washington Journal several years ago, and they said, they were very gracious. They brought him on. They said, let's go back to this clip. And so they asked him to comment on the clip. They said, well, what do you think about it? He said, well, I lied. I said, what kind of dystopian universe am I in? Are you serious right now? He said, and I lied because what we were trying to do was basically, I lied in service of the truth.
What?
Basically, yeah, because in order not to be prejudiced, well, I didn't tell the truth there. I just said, look, I don't know what to tell you guys. I mean, we don't trust the media. That is what they're saying. We're going to have Jim Narakis on from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, where they're going to show that 60 Minutes pushed Kamala Harris to the right. They didn't ask her questions so that she could give them answers. They framed the questions, and we know this because this is what we do. They framed the questions so they could push her to the right. And we need to understand how the game is played, everybody, which is why I share things with you that I do. Really, Kenneth, I hear you about voting straight party, but coming out of Chicago, can't do it. I really vote by the person, and I'm going to hold to that. But if you want to vote straight party, I hear you, because I'm going to tell you it's a uni party. If you think about it, the Democrats and Republicans don't let anybody else on the stage. Think about that. Think about it, because it disadvantages you and everybody else. But let's get to it, because there is hope. It is alive. The Gaza First Amendment Watch from Defending Rights and Dissent. There is a lot of misinformation out here about what's happening. Well, Gaza, West Bank, I guess now Lebanon just continues to expand. But we saw a CNN anchor who was corrected by a physician who's been in Gaza. And she said, no. This is not a war. This is a genocide. Stop. And you saw the anchor freeze because clearly she's been given her instructions. They don't pay you millions of dollars a year to do what you want to do. You are not going to go rogue on those platforms. That having been said, credibility is being lost, and more Americans want watchdogs. But the watchdogs that we have to be able to trust. And I certainly do trust defending rights and dissent, because I mean, it seems like the First Amendment is under attack. But I've heard different political figures whom we like go after the right to speak freely. You know, I've heard Vice President Harris do that, President Obama. I said, well, wait a minute, that's really sacrosanct. It's sacred, kind of, sort of. Other people don't have that. Talk to me. What is this watchdog group that you have now? This Gaza First Amendment Watch. What about that?
Sure. So yesterday, Defending Rights and Dissent launched a new project. It's a biweekly newsletter called Gaza First Amendment Watch, but the name might be changing to Gaza First Amendment Alert, because somebody else has a newsletter with Watch in the title, and they complained. But for now, we're still Gaza First Amendment Watch. And it is a new biweekly newsletter that is designed to be a single place for policymakers, journalists, advocates, and just members of the public who want to know what's going on can get a sort of comprehensive rundown of all of the threats to free speech, free expression, transparency, constitutional war powers, civil society, and civil liberties in the United States domestically that are stemming from our government's support for Israel's war in Gaza and now Lebanon. It's Gaza First Amendment Watch, but while we were working on it, Israel went into Lebanon. But I don't think we can have a title that will encompass all of the countries Israel will be at war with every month, given the rate this is going, which is very bleak and very dark. And it is, I don't want to say it's an exciting project, because we're dealing with repression of civil liberties, repression of basic rights in service of a brutal war that I think the CNN guest is correct, is a genocide. But it is a really important project, and it's one that I'm really proud to be part of, to give people a sort of comprehensive source every 2 weeks about how civil liberties have been restricted, how they've been attacked. The bulk of it is on here in the United States. The one exception is going to be, we will continue to monitor Israel's murder of Palestinian journalists, its attacks on the international press. And the reason why we do that is because our State Department funds Israel. Israel kills Palestinian journalists with American weapons. And earlier in the summer, I think it was August, time has no meaning for me anymore. It's just every month. Who knows? August, July. I was
2025 is here.
I was thinking about something that must have been just yesterday. It was March 2023. And to keep rereading, like 2023. No, must have been March. No. Earlier this year, we brought together 100 journalists, including 4 Pulitzer Prize winners, about 10 press freedom groups, including Defending Rights and Dissent, the Courage Foundation, Roots Action, and Freedom of the Press Foundation, and FAIR. I should note the FAIR was on there, to send a letter to Anthony Blinken telling him to impose an arms embargo on Israel because of their killing of journalists. And it's very rare to get U.S. journalists to take any sort of position on any issue. But we had over 100 journalists, including 4 Pulitzer Prize winners, saying Israel is killing journalists. It is doing so intentionally. It is doing so to hide the truth. Secretary Blinken, you said your press freedom is one of your top goals. You said the whole world needs to redouble its efforts for press freedom. The only way you can do that is to stop sending the guns, the bombs, the drones that are being used to assassinate Palestinian journalists. And here we are several months later, and in the opening issue of Gaza First Amendment Watch, we have a whole article on killing of journalists. And I had to rewrite it multiple times, because every time I thought I was finished with it, Israel committed another horrible atrocity. But it talks about Hassan Hamad. My Arabic is terrible. I apologize for all of the Arabic I am mispronouncing. Yeah. I don't speak Arabic. I've never studied. I apologize for my
Absolutely.
Arabic pronunciation. But we talked about Hassan Hamad, who was a 19-year-old Palestinian journalist. He started receiving threatening messages from Israeli numbers on his WhatsApp that if he didn't stop reporting, he or his family would be killed.
That's right.
He survived multiple attacks, including on October the 6th. He described a drone attack by a quadcopter. And then later that day, he went home to his bedroom to upload the footage he had recorded. And Israeli soldiers fired artillery directly through his bedroom window, killing him. And witnesses to the attack told Middle East Eye that that was a direct targeting. And that was on October the 6th. And then just 2 days later, in the Jebediah refugee camp, which has been described as a killing cage, an extermination zone, Israel does multiple attacks on journalists. It killed Al Aqsa TV cameraman Mohammed El Tani and injured another Al Aqsa journalist, Tamir Labad. Again, I apologize. I know I'm not pronouncing these names correctly, but I feel it's important that we say these people's names who were killed with our taxpayer money. And then that same day, in a separate attack, they left an Al Jazeera photojournalist, Fadi El Wahidi. They shot him in the neck and left him quadriplegic. He is in critical condition. I saw last night before I was going to bed that there is an effort to get him out of Gaza so he can receive medical aid. The last I saw that, he had been denied that, and that various press freedom groups were campaigning for him to get a medical evacuation. I knew someone who worked in the U.S. on getting medical transfer out of Gaza. It's very, very difficult to do, but it does happen. And then, in Israel, while they're killing these Palestinian journalists, they arrest Jeremy Lafredo, who is an American journalist. And he was with the Gray Zone, and he took video footage of the results of Iranian missile strikes on Israel, which PBS did. I don't think people know this, but Israel has a really strict regime of military censorship. And most American journalists, your CNN, your New York Times, etc., comply with Israel military censorship when they report for Israel, from Israel, not for Israel, although some of the reporting might as well be for Israel. And, the New York Times stations its Middle East office in Israel. So all of the stories people write, including those from occupied territories, go through that office, making them subject to Israeli military censorship, which the Times complies with. Jeremy Lafredo was a real journalist, so he didn't comply with a military censor, and Israel arrested him and 4 other journalists. And those journalists described, in the ones who've been released, in very harrowing detail how they were treated. Israel regularly abuses detainees. He was released from an Israeli prison, detention center, but his passport has been taken. His phone has been taken. The Israeli government is trying to crack into his phone, and he's not allowed to leave Israel until October the 20th, and he is still charged with aiding the enemy. And this brings the number of journalists killed to, I believe, 152. I'm looking at that number in front of me, and I know that number is already out of date. I mean, like I said, I started writing this a week before publication, to give myself some time, and I had to continuously update it because there were more attacks on journalists. But at the other hand, one of the things we highlight is some of the good journalism. I know there's not a lot of it going on right now. And so we mentioned these sorts of 2 investigative reports from ProPublica about how USAID and the State Department experts independently concluded Israel was blocking U.S. humanitarian assistance to Gaza, which under U.S. law means you can't receive U.S. guns, U.S. weapons, U.S. arms. And the State Department higher-ups just rejected these findings. And Blinken even told Congress Israel was not blocking aid. And this has led to calls for Blinken to resign, be impeached, or even face prosecution. And then, ProPublica also published a second report on the weapons pipeline to Israel. And it mentioned how Israel sent a case of wine to the State Department officials who are sending them weapons as a thank you so much. And then there was a Drop Site News is one of the brighter spots in the media right now. They had a very disturbing story about how Blinken had traveled to Israel, and he personally participated in a program drop a policy that allowed Israel to attack humanitarian aid convoys if they could say they were seized by Hamas. And Israel says everything is seized by Hamas: hospitals,
Mhm.
aid convoys, and then of course the bulk of this is on the domestic front. And last I guess it wasn't last week anymore. Maybe it was last week. We saw the 1 year anniversary of October the 7th,
Yeah.
which is, both the anniversary of an attack by Palestinian groups that did kill Israeli civilians, as well as the start of a war that is clearly a genocide. And we saw a lot of student groups who on both sides of the debate want to hold events. And there was a huge organized effort to suppress pro-Palestinian students from having any events whatsoever. And I'm on all the Anti-Defamation League newsletters. I read them, so I know what they're doing. They're fascinating. Just leave it at that. And
well, fascinating in what way?
Well, let me say, in the case of October the 7th, there was clearly, you see what they're monitoring, right? You see every day I get a list about the campus crisis in my inbox, in my email inbox. And it's like, 20 students at Dartmouth held Palestinian flags. Meanwhile, at Swarthmore, someone posted a pro-Palestinian thing to Instagram. So you see the depths of their monitoring, but you also see how organized they are. So, for example, in the run-up to October the 7th, they continuously ran these inflammatory headlines in their newsletter. Oh, they're going to desecrate October the 7th. They're going to glorify terrorism, all these things, and then they had an organized campaign to get universities to clearly shut down political speech. They sent a letter to university presidents reminding them that while universities support the First Amendment, support free speech as part of their basic ethos, that the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department has been clear, or the Education Department has been clear, that even protected speech can constitute a hostile environment. So this sort of abuse of civil rights law, which is extremely important, extremely central to achieving a more just society, to try to browbeat and abuse universities into telling them they have to shut down political speech the ADL doesn't like. And on top of that, the letter told them to collaborate with law enforcement about any rules of protest regulations. And it also and they gave people a sample email that they could write to universities across the country, and it included things like, even peaceful protests that comply with campus guidelines may be traumatic for the Jewish communities, and that while free speech was important, we have to implement concrete steps now to prevent our campus from becoming a hostile environment. And in Maryland, which is where I'm from originally and is very close to where I am now, I'm in DC, the University of Maryland system originally approved Jewish Voice for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine to have an interfaith vigil mourning the Palestinian civilians who had been killed. And they then reversed that policy, and they banned all expressive conduct that was not initiated by the school system for the entire University of Maryland system. And that the ADL is taking credit for, or partial credit for it at least, on its Twitter, in its newsletter. It's praising this decision. The Democratic governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, also supported this decision, I believe. It seems he was very supportive of it.
But upon what basis?
Well, it will be traumatic, or it will be upsetting to people. And Palestine Legal and the Council on American Islamic Relations Care went to federal court, and a federal court confirmed what you're thinking. This is unconstitutional. And they had the vigil. And, several hundred students gathered, mostly silently, completely peacefully, completely nonviolently, of all faiths, and mourned people who had been murdered in a genocide. And this is what the ADL was trying to stop from happening. And I would note, on that same day, there was also a pro-Israel vigil, which is their First Amendment right. But I was looking at it, and they had members of Congress there. They had people from these big pro-Israel groups there. And, there's all this talk about outside agitators. on college campuses, and that outside agitators are the cause of all the unrest. I believe Hillary Clinton and Mike Johnson and Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump are all in agreement on this one, that the students would not be protesting because of the horrible images of people being burned to death while they're attached to an IV in a hospital, or dropping 1,000-pound bombs on refugees in tents. No, it's these outside agitators. And of course, you grew up in the civil rights movement, so you know the history of that very vicious lie. But what I note at the Maryland protest is that the Maryland protest is all students. And it's, very low key. I think they had a megaphone, whereas the pro-Israel one, it looks like they have a stage and amplified sound, and they have members of Congress, or one member of Congress, Denny Hoyer, who's, to the best of my knowledge, not a current University of Maryland student. They have, big representatives from pro-Israel groups. So it is sort of not lost on me that while we have members of Congress saying the campus protests are caused by outside agitators, we have members of Congress, mostly Republicans, but also Democrats, going and visiting the campuses in order to get things whipped up for the other side.
Alert from Google, password required.
My computer is always talking to me.
But what's interesting? They've let the paid agitators who were at UCLA,
yes,
who they tracked to Bill Ackman and even Jerry Seinfeld's wife.
Yeah.
They have left them alone. They talk about outside interference, in American politics. They've been left alone. And I'm just, just as you're tracking this, and I think what is galling Chip Gibbons, defending rights and dissent, is that you don't have the space to say it.
Well, we're creating the space to say it. I mean, that's part of the reason why we did this newsletter, is because we do want to give people a single source of what all the attacks on the First Amendment are, what all the attacks on civil society are. And as I was compiling the section on the attempts to stop protests on October the 7th, I was also reading my ADL newsletters. First thing I do every morning, I read my newsletter from the ADL now. Who would have thought? What?
Why?
Because I want to know what they're saying. It's really easy to track repression of pro-Palestinian speech when you get the newsletter from the ADL, where they lay out how they're going to do it, who they're going to target, and tell you who to contact to help them do it. Right.
But I think people need to hear that, because I read a wide range of news sources on the right, the left, the center, the outside. Because I can't speak, I think, intelligently about these issues unless I know where everybody's coming from. I think that is really, really important, because you also understand that what we do oftentimes is we're fighting to catch up. And, Dr. King used to say that evil men plot, therefore good men must plan. And, that's why I appreciate this First Amendment Watch. The name might change, but the mission will not, because this bears watching. We need to have a discussion about this. What is the danger of shutting down free speech, particularly with respect to this issue? I mean, because I'm trying to figure out because you go to your embassy if you're out of the country for cover. Can our journalists do that in the Middle East?
So in the case of Jeremy Lafredo, the great reporter, the State Department has confirmed he is receiving consular assistance. Although I have absolutely covered stories of Palestinian Americans who were brutalized by Israeli military police, and the consul definitely tried to help them. And I think there was some interference from Washington. It is 100% clear that the United States government does not value its citizens who are Palestinian, Arab, or Muslim American, and does not value of any faith, religion, race. If you don't agree with its foreign policy, we've seen multiple Americans killed by Israel. And this is not limited to Israel. People who are older than I am might remember when Benjamin Lord, or a American, was killed in Nicaragua by the Contras. He was providing assistance to civilian infrastructure projects, and he was brutally murdered by the Contras, who, if there ever was a group that deserved the label terrorist, it was him. There were, I believe, 1 or 2 journalists killed by the Pinochet government in the 70s, and there is substantial evidence that the U.S. Participated in it. So I don't want people to think this only happens with Israel. The United States has a history of shutting down criticism of its foreign policy, and support of Israel is a huge part of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. On top of that tendency, we do have the existence of an organized effort in this country to suppress pro-Palestinian speech. This is not in the Gaza First Amendment Watch yet, but it will be next week. Yesterday, the Heritage Foundation, which launched Project 2025, and which also was the backing for so many of Ronald Reagan's attempts to restore, CIA covert actions and FBI surveillance after the Church Committee, and we're very active in lobbying for the prosecution of Julian Assange. I always find it interesting when I read their advice on how to indict Julian Assange, how closely it tracks to what the Trump administration actually did. Obviously, that's a correlation. It's not causation. I'm not alleging they were behind it, but given their influence on the Trump administration, it is worth thinking about that one. Yesterday, they launched Project Esther, named after Queen Esther from the Old Testament.
Yes.
People who might recognize that name, and it is a national project to combat anti-Semitism, which anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish bias is a horrible form of bigotry that has been responsible for terrible atrocities, pogroms, the Holocaust. I in no way minimize that, but this is the Heritage Foundation. Most of the people involved in this are from that sort of, there are many great Christians who call upon their faith to do justice, but that sort of Christian nationalist right-wing world that I'm sure you're familiar with.
Well, it's not Christian. It's just nationalist.
Yes, but they're not Jewish though. Is my point. And they have this document that they claim is about protecting us from anti-Jewish bigotry, which is a wonderful goal, and I would be happy to support them if they were doing that. And then you start looking at it, and it's like there's a network of anti-Zionist, anti-American Hamas supporters in America, and it's like, oh, this is a blueprint for political repression. And again, we should be afraid because the Heritage Foundation spent a bunch of time in the late 70s, early 80s, whipping up a frenzy and attacks on individuals who were in solidarity with the people of Central America, the people who were being attacked by Contra-terrorists because they had chosen a government for themselves that Ronald Reagan didn't like. Well, Carter actually got a lot of that started, but it's always bipartisan, isn't it? Or in El Salvador,
it is.
where you had death squads killing American nuns and massacring entire villages.
And priests. Didn't
they shoot Oscar Romero at Mass?
Absolutely.
They shot him at Mass.
No, they killed him.
If we want to talk about repression of religious rights, which the nationalist right loves to talk about in this country, let's look at some of the people we funded in Central America in the 80s. Anyways, but there were Americans, many of them religious people, many of them Catholics, Christians, who saw their fellow church people being murdered. Others of them just, people who don't like massacring civilians. And they started organizing against this policy. And the Heritage Foundation started this campaign demonizing them as supporters for terrorism. Supporters of, and a lot of the anti-terrorism stuff, people don't realize it, but the Heritage Foundation got that started in the late 70s, well before 9/11. That's an entire different conversation.
But I want to have it.
When I finally finish my book, there will be an entire chapter on that. I know you say, Chip, you've been working on this book for 4 or 5 years now, but it's an entire history of the FBI, so it's a big book.
And I want to do we have to do a podcast, or I'll join a podcast that you have, because I would just love to observe it. Because I think that we need to see, before you go,
yes,
what you're helping us to do is to understand how this works. The quiet part is being said out loud. Everybody, please stay tuned for the second hour. We're going to be talking about Michigan and whether and how the vice president can win Michigan, or what Trump is doing to win Michigan. We got to talk about that. Arlene, you say the election first must be focused on rejecting Project 2025, fascism, white supremacy. You're right. But my brother, who is in Congress, said, be very clear, Project 2025 has already been rolled out. And so we need to really understand what we're looking at. We have to understand what we're looking at and really understand Project 2025 cannot be a slogan. You need to understand what Project 2025 is set up to do. And most of us do not, because if we understood it, we'd understand that we're in the midst of it already. The last couple of minutes belong to you, because I mean, and we want, and how can we get this biweekly newsletter and under what, and just how can we get it? What is it called, and will it be changed? Just talk to us.
Sure. So if you go to rightsandDissent.org, the first thing on the front of our page right now is the first issue of the Gaza First Amendment Watch. When you click on that link, and I can send to just share your Twitter as well, you can sign up at the top. You can read the newsletter if you think it's great. You can sign up for it if you think it's terrible. I'm sure I will hear from you. I always hear from people who don't like what I've done. That's great. We have a First Amendment to share that sort of thought. Though some not all thoughts need to be shared. I will note the First Amendment doesn't mean you have to say it.
Nice. Everybody,
you've been on television. You know what it's like. Lots of people share things that maybe they should have kept to themselves.
Yes. Yes.
It's a wonderful country to be a democracy. But and like I said, let me just run through the stories in it this week, every other week. The first one is on the attempts to stop protests on October the 7th and how that went. The second story is about I'm going to butcher this name, a group called Samwadin, Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, which has been sanctioned by the Office of Foreign Asset Control as a sham charity, allegedly a sham charity as a front for terrorism. That's the second story. There's a bizarre story from Harvard where students held a study-in at the library. If you're wondering what a study-in, they went to the library and wore their keffiyehs and studied, which, is what you do in the library. You study. People wear lots of clothing, keffiyehs, other things. And they had signs on their laptops that said, while we're studying, Israel is bombing Lebanon, things like that. They've been banned from the library for 2 weeks, so studying on the library is not allowed. The story after that is schools are relying on U.S. immigration policy to silence students. We tracked this really horrifying story from Cornell University where a graduate student, was threatened with deportation by the DHS after he was suspended for pro-Palestinian protest. I'm really happy to say this is a story I had to update at the last minute because he won and is not going to be deported now. But there was another student at the University of South Florida who had to leave the country because he was suspended for protesting. If you're on an F1 student visa, you have to be enrolled. If your school kicks you out because you exercise your First Amendment rights, that creates the collateral consequences for in terms of immigration policies. The next story after that is the continued attacks on journalists, something that is deeply, deeply a passion of mine. Santita, I used to come on and talk to you about Julian Assange. I was telling everyone don't jail journalists, and now I'm going around telling people not to kill journalists. I don't know what that says about where we're going. And then the final story in this whatever the 2-week period is called is the positive investigative journalist that we've seen shine light on the war. And for the next issue, we're already looking at the ramifications of this application of counterterrorism sanctions to an NGO. We're looking at Project 2025. The people who drafted Project 2025's idea to use that model to shut down pro-Palestinian speech. We're looking at these calls from Congress to make Students for Justice in Palestine register under FARA. And, the last newsletter only came out yesterday. It's only been, 24 hours, not even 24 hours. It came out at 11, and we already have these 3 stories. So who knows what will be in it 2 weeks from now. This has been a very grueling project because there is so many attacks on our First Amendment right now, but it is nothing compared to what the people of Gaza, the people of the West Bank, and the people of Lebanon are facing. So we're going to keep powering through this. We're going to keep bringing you the truth. We're going to keep standing up for the right of all Americans to exercise their First Amendment rights when it comes to U.S. foreign policy.
Chip Gibbons, everybody. Rights and Dissent, everybody. At Chip Gibbons 89. At Chip Gibbons 89. Follow him on Twitter. Go and support Rights and Dissent. Please follow them. I mean, we need the information. We need it. And they are killing journalists. It is an absolute shame. Hundreds have been killed. And I think we're up to thousands. And so it's but we need truth. And this is the only protected class of employment in our Constitution, because the republic will fall. Democracy cannot thrive without a free and open press. You're going to have to come back and talk about the mistrust that Americans have of the corporate media. You got to come back and talk about that. But know that you have a platform here to talk about this newsletter, because we need to know what's going on. Now we have troops on the ground there. So we have skin in the game. They've been there over there already, but now they are on the ground for that mission. And we need to understand what's going on. Second hour, everybody, let's talk with Dr. Ghanim, Ahmed Ghanim, from the Uncommitted Movement. Can Kamala Harris win? Can she win without the Arab American community? Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show, everybody. Get on over to the second hour. Sending you much love. Miss Wanda and Kenneth and Roni and Arlene. See you in a minute on the Santita Jackson Show, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.